Hello, in this video, we'll continue with the functions in Python topic. So let's just recap how to define a function. We have to use EF, and then we give a name of a function. So we've done product. Let's do sum function. And then over here, you give the parameters, say A and B, and then put a colon and enter. And then so you define a new variable saying A plus B, and then you print Z. And then remember at the end of a function, we will return whatever you are calculating. So this is how you would make a function in Python. And this function is basically adding two parameters or adding two numbers. Once you define a function, what you have to do is call the function. And how do you call the function? What you have to do is write down the name of the function, and in the bracket, in place of the parameters at this point, you give the numbers, say 2, 3. Okay, so what this top thing does is it makes the function to add two numbers, and this thing here is calling the function and doing the calculation. So now if you run this, the output is 5, 2 plus 3. For example, if you want a different number, all you have to do is come here and change the number and run the program, and it will give you the output as needed. So this was the basics of the functions we did last time. Remember, these A and B, when you define a function, they're called parameters. And when you're calling the function, they're called arguments. So these are some terms you have to remember. This is defining a function, and this is calling the function. Okay, so let's continue a little bit more about functions. So let's see some more examples. So let's see a function. Let me just see if it's recording. The volume is on because last time volume was not working. Okay, let's define a function. Let's call it name function. That will take the first name and last name as parameters. And all it does is say print the first name and last name. So this is an example of a function where you don't have to return a value. So there's a possibility that the return at the end of a function is not needed. And this is one function where you just have to print things. And then you call it the same way. All you have to do is name underscore function, and then in double quotes, since it's a name, we will give the parameters as arguments. If you run this now, the output is A, B, C, D, E, F. So this is an example of a function where you don't have to return a value. Another example of a function is where you don't even have to give a parameter. So for example, if you just want a hello function, to print the hello function, you don't need to give the parameters either. So all you have to do is to call the function. You just say name underscore function and open and close bracket. All this will do is print hello. So once again, there's a possibility that you don't have to give any parameters and you don't have to return the value. But just make a note here, if you give two parameters, then in the calling of the function, you have to give two arguments. If you give three parameters, then you will have to give three arguments, or else it will give an error. So with this in mind, let's do one more example, which will be called star arguments. means star ARGS. Now, when do we use this? We use this when we are not sure how many arguments to pass. Arguments to pass. So what you do is, let's define a function. Let's do the name function again. And now, since we don't know how many arguments to pass, all you have to do is say star and give a parameter and do colon. So now what this will do is, it will keep it as a open number of parameters. And let's just print say names, and let's see if it works. And then all you have to do is, when you call the function, say name underscore fn, let's give some name, say Emily, then Ali, and let's give one more. Let's say Ramesh. Yeah, if you give these three names, you can also increase the number of arguments here because there is no limit right now because you've set star names. Now, if you run this, let's see what happens. So if you run this, it will automatically print all three arguments as your output. But what if you want to just print the second one or the first one? What you have to do is go in the print names here. In the square brackets, you give a number. So for example, if I say names 1, then what will happen is this will count. This is 0 index, 1 index, 2 index. So the first index you have Ali. So the output will be Ali. Let's write it properly. Right, similarly, if you say 2 here, then the output should be Ramesh. What if you gave a 3 here? Then what do you think will happen? So this is 0, 1, 2. If I give a 3 here and run this, it will give you an error because there is no third argument. But what you can do is give one more argument, say Rocky or something. And now if you run this, the output is Rocky because Rocky is at index 3. So make a note, when you're not sure how many arguments to pass, always give star with the name of a variable. Okay, let's do one more topic. It will be, what if you want to use functions with list? If you remember, we've learned list. So let's do functions with list. So let's define a new function. Let's do the same thing, say names underscore fn. Now in terms of list, all you have to do is leave a variable here. But to use a list, you will have to use the for command that we've learned before. So make a note, to use list with functions, you'll have to use for inside a function. So you'll have to say for x in, then give the name of the list and put a colon. And let's just print it. So we'll say print x. This becomes a function which takes the list called names and prints all the values of the list. And then at the bottom here, you can define the list. For example, if we say names is, let's just do basic alphabets, A, B, C. So now if I run this, The output is, hopefully no errors. Okay, it didn't run. Why do you think it did not run? So maybe something to think. It did not run because we haven't called the function. So make a note, to run a function, you will always need to call it. So to call the function, what you'll have to do is write down the name of the function. And in the bracket, just give the name of the list. So now if I run this, the output is A, B, and C, whatever is in the list. Now let's see if we give the square brackets and give a number here. Does it do what we are expecting? So will it print C here? Prints C. So very important, this is how you will use list with function. The other thing to remember is the name of the list doesn't have to be the one you've given on the top. So what you can just say is Y here is ABC. And in the bracket, you can give another list. It automatically understands that this is a list which is to be used in this function. So if I run this, the output again will be ABC. So this is like some basic examples of how you can use functions. We'll do more of this, but let's do that in the next video. So this much for this video, and then we'll continue in the next video. Let me stop recording.